Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Los Angeles' racist Latino councilman scandal has led to cries from the public for them to resign, even from their own colleagues on the council. But from the very beginning, their response has been, "No way, Jose." After a half-hearted statement from President Alzheimer, Nury Martinez threw in the towel, but what of her other cohorts? Kevin DeLeon hasn't stepped down, and neither has Gil Cedillo. As I said before, Gil Cedillo lost his bid for re-election earlier this year, so at this point, he's just serving out the rest of his term. As he sees it, he has nothing to lose by refusing to resign. After all, what's going to happen? Are they going to vote him out of office? But what is he going to do afterwards? Kevin DeLeon's also refusing to resign. Unlike Cedillo, though, he's not a lame duck. He's not resigning because he knows that he still has the full support of the Latino political structure there. You haven't heard any denunciations of him or any of the other members from La Raza or MALDEF, that's the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. These are leading Hispanic organizations, and they haven't said a word to call for the ouster of those racist council people. Instead, they're steadily demanding mass amnesty for illegal aliens. That's been their focus. They haven't even talked about this. And this omission is particularly glaring coming from MALDEF. The scandal in Los Angeles is the biggest political story regarding Hispanic politicians in the country right now. But Hispanic activist groups are acting as if they don't know about it. Hispanic media personalities are either ignoring it wholesale or talking about it simply as a story about three crass politicians and a crooked union rep and nothing more than that. They don't bring the culture of anti-black racism that these four individuals came from into the discussion at all. Well, as we all know, silence equals assent. They're not saying anything because they agree with it. But even if Cedillo and DeLeon were to resign tomorrow, hell, even if they had already resigned, what about a year from now? What's to stop them from coming back as soon as they think that the stench has died down a little bit? Already there are people vying to take Nury Martinez's seat, but none of these candidates have a track record that's any better or any different than hers. None of the would-be heirs to Nury Martinez's seat have said a word about the culture of anti-black racism in the Hispanic community that brought this all about in the first place. But of course, that's not going to stop the white media and the feeble go-along-to-get-along black misleaders and professional community activists from claiming that once these guys are gone, the city can now start to heal. Now some changes can finally take place. And it's those black misleaders who will try to lend a phony air of legitimacy and validity to whatever do-nothing gestures and maneuvers come out of this putrid incident. We need to accept that most of the black politicians have already agreed with white power to see black people gentrified out of the major cities. For the longest time, the white media pushed the narrative that these black misleaders were important because black votes could turn elections in this or that city, and that was valid for a time. But as the years have passed, we see, such as with low-down Willie Brown in San Francisco, that these bootlicks are perfectly fine seeing the numbers of black residents in their cities drop overnight. For these bootlicks, the game is resume enhancement, nothing more. What they're doing is they want a job from the white power structure, and they want to make themselves valuable to white power. So they don't need a black majority in their city to do that, or even a black swing vote. That's what the bootlicks figured out a long time ago. They figured out that they could apply for a job with white power merely by having just enough black people who they can claim to be the leaders of. Doesn't matter if it's a whisk club or not. And a lot of them have made it clear that they'll lick the boots of whomever is in power. And that's why you see these chumps yucking it up with the Nury Martinezes of this world, the same way that they yucked it up with the Strom Thurmonds and the Joe Bidens and other die-hard white supremacists. You see, a bootlick will lick the boots of whomever is in front of them. They don't really care about the color of the person whose boots they're licking. But the mendacity of these bootlick misleaders is greatly exacerbated by the refusal of the black masses to accept what's been right in front of them. As black people, too many of us have become addicted to aspiration. We are an aspirational people, and I mean that in a bad way. When you have a group of people who have been robbed of all opportunities and attacked constantly, we have less chance than anyone of achieving our goals in life. So we've given up on having power of our own. A lot of us have given up on that completely, and you can tell the ones who have because they try to live vicariously through singers, athletes, politicians, and entertainers. But there's another kind of aspirational living that needs to be called out. because this second kind of aspirational living is far more common and far more deadly than the first. We try to aspire to non-existent things. This is why you see all these Negro nerds who lose their minds when you call out these racist comic book movies or sci-fi shows. Because in their minds, this is an escape from reality. That's what it represents to them. To white people, these movies are shows about power fantasies because they show white people, mostly white men, who are flying or have superpowers. They're superhumanly strong and saving the world, which is exactly the opposite of what we see in real life. And for black people, they're addicted to these make-believe media fantasies merely because these are the only places that you see blacks and whites interacting without the white people being totally racist. We simply don't want to accept that the dominant society knows exactly what a non-racist society is, what it would look like, but they don't want it. They don't mind having the occasional black superhero or sci-fi starship captain, just so long as they know that when they turn off the TV or leave the movie theater, they'll still live in a world where black people have no power at all. This is the same well that black people draw from when we start talking about black-brown alliances. You can't have an alliance without a partner. We've made entreaties for every type of cross-racial alliance there is, and those we've made the invitations to have never gotten dewy-eyed and talked about their communities facing the same problems that black people do. We were using the same language that socialists used in the early to mid-20th century to convince black activists that the big issue was class and not color. That's the trap that a lot of black people fell into. Class division is a delusion that black people cannot afford, thank you, H. Rap Brown. Other groups only talk about their own community, full stop. This is part of the delusional aspiration that many of us suffer from. Black people aspire to have friends and don't want to accept that white supremacy has shaped the entire world to revolve around the principle of anti-black racism. Nor do we wish to accept that some of the worst anti-black racism is coming from people who don't even qualify as white. This is not about just 4 racist Latino leaders. This is about an anti-black culture that extends far beyond the usual white supremacists. This is about how the phrase people of color has never been valid because most of the people who the white media calls people of color see themselves as honorary members of the oppressor class, or at least aspiring members of the oppressor class. Since the mid-19th century, starting with Irish immigrants, this country has made it very clear to these incoming groups who are not classified or considered white that the only way to be accepted by the dominant society is to prove that they are totally dedicated to the principle of anti-black racism. And this becomes more insidious when you have people from countries such as Latin America who already had a culture of anti-black violence and bigotry of their own before they even came here. And they're not alone. That's the reality. The reason those 4 anti-black racists did what they did and became arrogant when they were caught out was because they knew the anti-black racism they practiced wasn't some dirty little secret. The only reason Nuri Martinez resigned was because she ran afoul of Osakans. She fractured her own internal support among her fellow Hispanics. Black people don't factor into her decision, but what we do factor into is making sure that people know what this is really about. Regardless of what the bootlicks on TV or in this or that white media publication said, the black grassroots have always told the truth about the cross-racial alliance and why it never materialized, long before the white media was finally forced to have to admit that there was a problem, however briefly. It is what we do that will decide how this all turns out. As long as black people sat back waiting for the cross-racial alliance to become real, we let events play out, including violence by Latin American gangs against black enclaves in California. Well, black people at long last are finally ignoring these self-serving activists and politicians. And they're also losing their fear of offending allies by admitting that we're being attacked. And we're not being bashful about saying, no, we are not all a little bit racist. Some folks are just totally racist while others are not racist at all. We were frozen with indecision, or rather frozen with confusion, between speaking the truth that we knew to be valid and sitting on our hands and hoping that the reality would change on its own. But at long last, the ice is beginning to thaw. The fear is being lost. And when black people lose their fear, that is when things finally begin to change. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Suleiman Alaji, Stone Thug Music, Larry Beard, King Edwards, and Tyrone Leak. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.